Welcome to the show with Ron. I'm Ron. This is a show where we look at the headlines that are being presented to us over the internet, which I guess is, you don't actually read a physical thing anymore. It's all on the internet. But these things are presented to us. Sometimes they have a bias. Sometimes there's some background that's left out for some reason. So we're going to add some context and commentary where available. And by doing this, we kind of I think we almost show a contempt for the news sometimes and that's good because people want us to go out there marching in their parade. They want us to go down swinging in someone else's fight. So we better get clear on what is really at stake here. So right off here, we have an interesting thing. We have a Department of Defense in the U.S. in supposedly in early talks to fund a peacekeeping force in Gaza. Now, this would not include Americans, soldiers on the ground. The U.S. and the UN have had a lot of peacekeeping missions over the year. We had in the Serbian problems in Bosnia in the 90s. We have the American soldiers there in Beirut that got blown up in the 80s. It's a kind of a difficult situation for a lot of Americans to accept sometimes, especially when they had peacekeepers on the ground who couldn't carry weapons or couldn't have bullets in their gun, this sort of thing. Now, it's probably the case in Gaza that it's going to be a better situation because certainly I don't think Israel is going to attack those peacekeeping soldiers there. And hopefully, the situation in Gaza was that the Palestinians, who everybody is supporting now, they were not really in charge of their government. There was a terrorist organization, Hamas, that took over in a coup and had been running the country. And certainly they seemed to be aligned with Iran, and Iran was doing things as they do now because they have an interest in making sure Israel does not make peace with its other neighbors like Saudi Arabia. Okay, I just had to turn up the air conditioning. I was getting overheated here. Talking about the Middle East again. This is an interesting thing. I think it certainly plays into the elections this year because Biden has been caught off guard by his strong support for Israel. This is strong support for Israel, no matter what, has been a keystone of U.S. foreign policy. Of course, Israel is the one democracy there in the Middle East, and there's a lot of other really dictatorial countries verging on evil that have attempted to destroy, take down, surprise attack to drive Israel out of there. So it was a surprise, certainly, when Hamas, after they took the hostages and did all that stuff in Israel, people in the world, many of them young people, and in America and in Western liberal democracies, they were supporting the Palestinians, which seems surprising. And I think, in some cases you say, yes, it's this whole two-state solution that we have with both Israel and the Palestinians coexisting. But if you don't know the context, if you don't know that Hamas took over half of the Palestinian territories there out in Gaza, while the other part of the Palestinian Authority was still in the West Bank, if you don't know that, you might not have the finesse to react properly. And we see a lot of the young people in America, in Europe, are actually not only opposing Israel, but Jews themselves. It's a weird circumstance. Speaking of weird circumstances, here we have Donald Trump, his legal troubles, but some of them got sorted out in the last week. That huge bond he had to put up for the judgment that he was appealing, that was, I don't doubt that maybe the circumstances behind the case are are warranted, but the media was so excited about that huge bond, which clearly was never going to be upheld for him having to pay it because he would have had to sell all of his properties, which was, considering he was still in appeal, that would be an irreversible circumstance to sell those properties. So again, I think the media gave anti-Trump people perhaps false hope. If like, oh, we've bankrupted him, and it's all timed out right during the election year. Ha ha ha. I where this lands, I don't know. And the big question is whether as all of this is certainly timed to come to pass this year in the lead up to the election, will this once these cases are coming to a close, and they certainly will before the election, will the people who support Trump no longer support him, or will they feel like this is all part of a conspiracy and Trump will become more powerful than ever, just like striking down Obi-Wan? I think the media has tried to say that everybody's going to leave Trump. They're going to abandon him because of these legal cases. Whether that's true, I don't know. We'll see. I suspect it's probably not the case. I suspect the media is saying that because they want to precede the idea of how to think about this situation when it comes to pass. Once Trump is like in jail or in cuffs or being hauled off to jail or bankrupted, they want people to, they want to precede this idea. I don't know if that's the right thing. And there's also this I had talked about in a previous one. Again, the media. You see, Trump says a lot of crazy things already. That there's no reason for the media to be this unhinged about him, because they falsely trumped up this bloodbath quote of him. Really a really good example of taking things out of context. So much so that even the LA Times had to say, there's no reason for the media to falsely report this to everybody and go on and on about it when they know it's not true, that they know it's out of context, that they know that he didn't say this. Now, you could still say that, because of what we believe Trump is planning, anything that we say, no matter how much of it is propaganda or propaganda is correct, you could say that. But I think this is it's something the media doesn't have to do. And it's actually, if the media is saying we need to bend all the rules to make sure one party gets elected over the other, doing stuff like this is not it's not helping their cause. And also we had this thing about Pence cannot in good conscience endorse Trump. This was Trump's former vice president. When Trump was president, Pence, a super conservative guy, very staid, example of the old Republican Party, one that tries to uphold or says they uphold conservative values in life and personal conduct. So it was kind of surprising that someone like this, how ambitious do you have to be to link up with Trump? And in a very unusual circumstance, he's not going to endorse Trump for another term. Just thought I'd bring that up. I'm from the same area of the world, the country, the U.S., that Pence is from. I understand that kind of uptight person. Sort of think of a Hank Hill. That's who you have to think of, and that's somebody who Pence is like. Whoops, what's going on here? Okay. People trying to get magazines started, more about the royal family over there in Great Britain. People saying Biden's numbers are rising. what's the? This is the weirdest thing I'd ever heard. This ship that knocked down the bridge. It's fun to have it all on video, to see. Terrible that people died. It's strange you never hear about this happening all the time. It must be a vanishingly small event considering all the container ships that are going around. Oh no. Do I want to see a terrifying theory from Daily Mail? Do you? Maybe you ought to close your eyes. Alzheimer's may be able to spread to organ transplant patients. Okay. Yikes. Bone marrow transplants containing faulty genes. Okay. Yikes. Okay. I always, when I see those kind of links, and you see in something like Daily Mail, there's a lot of sensational, kind of fun and sensational stories with great layout of the graphics and lots of great photos along with it. It's so tempting. You can't stop clicking on it, and that is the intent of such articles. And of course, we have to be careful about getting medical information from these articles. They're usually almost always based on a study. You know, sometimes a couple of years they do a new study and it shows that original study is baloney. There's a lot of big play up of in the media of how Trump is somehow connected with all these religious groups, and you should be afraid of that. You know, when Trump was first elected, I was surprised. I was overseas, and when I came back into the town where Pence and his family are from, where everybody's a sort of that Hank Hill Catholic or Hank Hill Methodist, you know, the uptight people, of which I'm kind of one too. So I asked my hardcore Republican friends, why are all these religious groups and religious people, or even the Republicans in general, circling around a person like Trump? And they said, abortion. Abortion. This was way back in 2016. And the idea was that everybody knew that there was these Supreme Court justices that were going to be have to be appointed soon. And even though Trump, with all of his dangerous proclivities and his self-inflicted problems, he was the person who had to be there because he had popularity, and the Republican establishment was just going to deal with it, going to have to deal with him, because the bigger issue was abortion. Now, in the years after that, whenever I mentioned this to liberals, they laughed. Wouldn't happen, you know, because even when Reagan was in president, and everybody screamed and yelled that, oh, a Republican president shouldn't be allowed to appoint Supreme Court justices, even though that's the rules, because all the people he was going to appoint were going to be crazy, hardcore conservatives. And these sort of arguments really hadn't been pushed up in the media that much until the 1980s, and certainly a lot of Reagan's appointees turned out to be quite liberal, and he himself said, "I'm just trying to get the right person for the job," but everybody screamed and yelled about it. So I think even a lot of liberals thought, well, you know, the Supreme Court justices that are appointed are going to be people have their political viewpoints, but when a judge is there, when a jury, when people are put into these situations of judging things fairly, they often do. And so the liberals were confident that it was ridiculous that anybody could turn over the abortion ruling, Roe v. Wade. Well, that did happen. So I think the answer to all of this here is why are Christian groups supporting a person who is so decadent like Trump, is that He got the job done. He put in ideologues and they got that Roe v. Wade thing overturned. Whether you agree with it or not, that was impressive. That was amazing. That was a shocker, you know. And Democrats don't have anybody to blame but themselves. They had lots of times where they controlled both houses of the government. They could have adopted that into law. They could have pushed for a constitutional amendment to make sure that was safe and it would never get overturned. They never did. And the reason for that is for the last 40 years, everybody's been trying to capture the center in politics. So it was easier, instead of being shown as pro-abortion, you just rely on the ruling that was made in the law that allows the lawmakers to be off the hook for legislating abortion rights. We got issue. Well, here's the other part of that story is that ultimately, and I've talked about this before, in the United States, the guiding principle for politicians should be, this is what I have advised people in the past when I was a straight-laced, Hank Hill-like advisor, the watchword should be liberty. And Americans want the same liberty to choose abortion privately. That is, to utilize the best technology that is available to make your lives better. They want that outside of the laws for everybody else. They want that right for themselves. In the same way, they want the right to keep a gun and shoot at people occasionally. So this is what the Republicans are running into, especially with the crazy, more radical ones who want to just completely overturn all sort of abortion rights. There are many cases in state and local elections where these hardcore Republicans who are against all abortions, taking away all those rights, they're failing in the elections. This is an interesting lesson for the Republicans. Something about Boeing favoring speed over quality. I have to travel soon, so I'm not going to look at this. I don't want to know that. I'm just going to close my eyes and meditate on the plane and just be ready to die, because you still got to go places. You can't. Doesn't matter how dangerous it is. All this stuff about P. Diddy, that guy, I suppose. The interesting saying that this could trigger hip-hop's Me Too movement. Who knew that there was a lot of crazy sex going on with all these rapper guys? That's a joke. Oh dear, what's this? I just see, this was a headline. I didn't see it. Must have popped on here while I was doing the show. Farewell and good riddance to the typical American family. That is a good headline for clickbait, because anybody's going to click that. Americans are, well, what, how dare somebody say that? We're back to dinks again? Do you know what a dink is? D-I-N-K, an acronym for double income, no kids. I first heard about that in the 1980s. See, everything old is new again. That was a thing. You know, we had yuppies. We had all the hippies of the 60s and 70s. All of that kind of went by the wayside, and people were back to making money and corporate America. And, you know, the greed is good thing from the Wall Street movie. And we had this dinks back then. And gosh, I haven't heard of this word in decades. So now we're back to dinks again. And, you know, then as now, we had that period of political correctness from the late to the early 6 or 7 years around the 80s, mid to late 80s and early 90s. We had what we called political correctness. It was the same thing now that we have woke. It was where people had to be appointed to positions not on merit, but to make sure we have like a diversity quota and You have, I think one of the main things is it's not just you want more, say like an academic paper or a movie that contains black people or people of color, which is what we say now. It's not only that you want that academic paper or movie that says that. What the person who makes the movie or writes the academic paper about those people have to also be of that ethnic group as well. You can't be like a white woman and write about underprivileged women in Honduras. You have to actually be one of those women to write the papers. This was the concept. It was back then, and it kind of fell out of style. In the early 90s, it disappeared. And I think we're about seven, maybe 8 years into the current political correctness wave that came in maybe 2016, and it's kind of falling off a little now as people are protesting it. But how interesting that we have yuppie era stuff from the 80s and political correctness, and here we have these same yuppie era acronyms being pushed in the media again as if it's something you should know about. Maybe you haven't heard of it before. Interesting. I think going right to that, this was this article. It wasn't on Drudge. I can't remember how I found it, but this was this is the fragmentation of the American populace. I think this is the idea that there may be some subsets of people based around race or gender or usually more like social circumstance that a politician can use, has to be aware of to capture. And this became big in the 90s when the smart guys who were behind, I think maybe it was James Carville, they came up with this idea of the soccer moms. And this was a group of affluent, upscale white women in suburbia who had been locked into the Reagan Revolution. Reagan in the 80s, he overturned everything and the whole country went conservative. So this was the idea, those soccer moms who had thought, diehard, right-leaning Republican people, they could be brought over to a kinder, gentler Bill Clinton and his politics and the Democrats. And if they put certain policies directed to a certain group like that, you could cut into the assumed bulk of voters that would vote for one party or another. So here, this article attempts to break down some of those. Maybe we can look at a couple of these. We got Instagrammers, middle-aged women in professional class, engaged in visual journalism, TikTok kids. These are the people who are supposedly been brainwashed by China to hate Jews now and not support Israel anymore. I'm on TikTok, but boy, what a terrible, awful interface. Just that screaming stuff, one screen after another, very, very fragmented. Oh, we got new age grandmas, consumer news on Facebook that are trending older. Everybody knows this. Facebook's for the old people. All the young people who they're on Facebook, but then they're on Instagram or TikTok as well because they know the old folks don't see any reason to go over to those apps anyway because they're already on Facebook. They're already on with their old elderly friends, and they couldn't imagine why you would want an app on your phone anyway. The screen's too small. We got the right-wing grandpas, senior citizens, especially men, flocking to Fox News. Yikes. Around popular personalities. This is the way all of media's gone now. I don't know. Liberal warriors, MAGA melders. But the idea is you would get your brain trust in your election cabal to start looking at each of these groupings, and if you believe that they are real groupings, you might want to see how you could reach that group and kind of cut them off in the same way the Clinton people cut off the soccer moms in the mid 90s to have that group come to your side and stay there and be motivated to do something for your election hopes. Is that guy Bankman Fried sentenced to 25 years in prison for that cryptocurrency thing? Yeah. See, he should have just assaulted or maybe killed someone in manslaughter. He probably would have had less time in jail. I couldn't determine from this how much time he's actually going to serve, but I guess he deserves it. See, some people would say, and some people have been saying for decades now, that those sort of high number of years for financial crimes, in some cases, eclipsing, crimes to people, like assaulting people, that is sort of like the end, a signal of the end of the Roman Empire or the end of colonial Britain, where financial crimes supposedly were condemned much more greatly than crimes to a person or personal property. Here in some U.S. cities where certain assaults have been downgraded to a misdemeanor and people are just let go, that sort of thing. And then the reason that the financial crimes are attacked so much greater is that the organizations, big banks, big financial institutions, they have a lot of influence to go after certain people in certain circumstances that might disadvantage their whole system. But getting a little bit into conspiracies there, but trying to look at the background of some of these stories. Another thing I will not click on, next thing to spill out of China, super gonorrhea. Okay, thank you, China. See, that's what you couldn't say in the early days of the COVID epidemic. Anything like that. Got a message? Turn off my... we have this situation in Ukraine. This is a time where it seems like that if Trump is elected, he will not be engaging in foreign wars as much or paying out for foreign wars. This is something really also the liberal media tried to teach us in the early 2000s with George W. Bush, saying that he was, George W. Bush was a war criminal for starting those wars, paying for those wars, blah, blah, blah. And we don't, innocent women and children are being taken away and killed. They're bad. So even some on the right sort of began to believe that. Then a Democrat was elected, Obama. He right away started another war in Libya. It was even as much as disastrous as the one in Iraq. Maybe you haven't heard about it. Media didn't say anything much about him. They didn't say he was going to be dragged to the Hague. But the media has set up the public to be opposed to these foreign conflicts. And you see it's lighting a fuse in many places in the world. And, some countries are going to want to think they could make their move soon if they want to take over something or settle some old disputes. And this is all because of fears that U.S. policy is changing and might even change more drastically. You see how Biden has had to split with Israel over Israel's conduct of the war in Gaza, which, Israel has, they're the victims in this, but now they've lost the thread by the way they've conducted the war in Gaza. They know very well that the eyes of the world are on those situations. We saw that in the 1990s when the United States had all kinds of situations around the world. We saw that in Iraq and Afghanistan, where the U.S. is under the microscope, and Israel has has lost the propaganda war. You can win those battles and maybe lose the war. And finally, I'll mention this one too. This was an interesting article that I saw. Eight U.S. states planning to ban the sale of gas-powered cars entirely after ambitious plan to phase them out. But what was interesting is this little map, and one of the people who I have talked with and consulted with, foreigners don't quite understand the nature of American states. They're all like their little countries. But this map shows the more liberal or progressive states. These are the states, the most liberal or progressive ones, and they're all right at the forefront of banning the sale of gas cars, where a lot of other states would be like, I want to pollute and drive my big muscle car as much as I want. But it's interesting how these progressive laws do line up with the most progressive and liberal states. And it is very true that the way California goes, eventually the rest, they've been at the forefront of a lot of things, even conservative revolutions, like I think it was Proposition 13, essentially an anti-tax proposition way back. I don't know if it's the late 70s or early 80s, but that was the harbinger of conservatism across the United States and the anti-tax movement that went on for decades. Yeah, there's the cars that a lot of Americans love and want. It's old Steve McQueen. Anyway, I didn't think there was that much news today, but there really was ultimately. And don't go away, here's my book. Disillusioned by the promises of the modern world, young people make their way to Bangkok and then on to the furthest places they can find. There are still unknown places. And I just heard my book is now available at Kinokuniya branches at M Quarter, Central World, and Siam Paragon. I really wanted them to carry it, and it's in literature, which is cool, so this is another dream come true for me. Read it and let me know what you think, please. Thanks. So I think I rambled a little bit today, but I do think we ought to pause and think about the headlines and consider them before we go whole hog in getting all uptight about something. I know it helps me. So I hope that looking at the headlines, talking about them, thinking about them critically as opposed to just consuming them was helpful to you today. And I hope you come back and come to the channel next time for the next show with Ron. Bye-bye.